My name is David Finn Paulsen, son of Finn Bergstead Paulsen and Sarah Melissa Broadbent Paulsen. I was born April 5th, 1947 in the LDS Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up till 5 years old on a little triplex on West Temple next to Dirks Field. And then when I was 5 years, we moved to 1940 East, just off 33rd South. Thinking back of my early childhood memories, one of the first ones I have is a baseball game. The kids saying play ball at the Dirks Field there across the street from where we lived. That, and we lived across the street from a little variety store. It was just north of us, and I remember going into that little variety store. The other, after we moved at 5 years old, we moved to 1940 East, and there I made friendships with some of the boys that lived right there close. And we had a kid that came through from the other street named John Eberhart, and he wasn't one of us, and we were throwing dirt clods at him. He later became one of my best friends in elementary school. I was born in a family of five. I'm the oldest, the only son. I have four sisters. The oldest is Shauna, and Shauna was a very, very innocent person, and very kind of follows, very strict in following the lines. Susie was always known in the family as the the powerful hand covered with a silk glove. She was a very determined young lady, but had real ability to work with people. The next was Margaret Ann, and my early memories of her is that she was a little more rebellious. And I remember she and Mother having a lot of discussions about the length of skirts. And yet Margie has turned out to be one of the more straight-laced persons in the family. And then the baby was Louisa. Her actual name is Louise, but when we moved to Brazil, Louise is a boy's name, and so she has ever since been known as Louisa. And what I remember is her as in Brazil, when we first got to Brazil, within just a week or two, she was out playing with the kids and talking with them and having a great time, and the rest of us were very more reticent or shy about speaking Portuguese. Having four sisters was quite a challenge in my life. Being an older brother, I had to tease them, and my biggest challenge was to get them all crying at the same time. And Mom tells the story of I came upstairs, their bedroom was downstairs, they had a bedroom downstairs, and they were all upset with me and crying. She said I came upstairs just proud as a peacock, talking about how good I felt about getting them all going at the same time. Schooling. I did my elementary school at Libby Edwards on 33rd South. It's no longer a school in the Grant School District, but I have fond memories of that school and still have to sing the school song every time I drive past that. It's the only school song I know or my kids know. They don't know any of their own school songs, but they know that one, at least the little phrases. The next, I went to Evergreen Junior High for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. Then my family moved to Brazil, and I studied by correspondence, took high school correspondence classes for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. I returned and graduated actually from Skyline High School, and then went to BYU. Got my degree at BYU in civil engineering, and then ended up getting a Master's of Science degree in engineering also at BYU. Well, since I spent most of my high school career in Brazil, and there were only 7 of us in the whole high school, it was kind of a study group rather than a high school teaching situation. And all we played was ping pong. But I became a reader. I enjoyed reading. Since then, returning, one of my favorite things is hiking or skiing or just being out in the mountains. Lately, I've taken up rappelling down in the Canyonlands area, Zions. My oldest relative that I can remember was my grandpa Broadbent. Mom was the youngest or the second youngest of 12 living children. And so my grandpa was born in 1871. And one of the things I remember him telling me that he can remember seeing President Young when he visited their little Santaquin town, and all the primary kids lined the streets as he came into town. So I've always thought, well, that's interesting. Between my grandpa and I, we remember all the prophets of the church except for the prophet Joseph. One story I remember my mom telling me was about her great-grandfather and grandmother. They were converted to the church in the early 1830s up in New York, traveled to Nauvoo. My great-grandfather had a lot of back problems, was given a blessing by the prophet Joseph, and his life extended for a couple of years. But then he passed away, and Grandma, for some, was upset. She was going to go back to live with her family, and she drove her wagon out a day. That night, something happened, whether it was a vision or someone talking, but anyway, she decided to turn around and follow the saints, and then came west with the saints. She drove a little surrey, had a little lamb tied behind the surrey that walked across the west, and Grandma sat in the front seat with her corncob pipe, and my great-grandfather, he drove the wagon as a 16-year-old boy coming to, and they ended up living down in the center of Salt Lake. I met Deirdre Gay Murray at BYU the year after I got home from my mission. I was innocently going to church, and she came down and trapped me and had me help provide food for the opening social at our BYU ward. We dated for a number of months, and then I tried to date her after that first encounter, and I was always planning way ahead. On Wednesday, I'd call her up and ask her for a date on Friday night. But what I didn't know is I had to ask her 3 weeks ahead, and I had no idea what I was going to do in 3 weeks. So the dates didn't turn out very like I hoped to. So finally, in November, she asked me to bring her home bring her to Salt Lake to Thanksgiving, where her grandmother lived, where she was going to go for Thanksgiving. Things kind of got hot during that cold winter time. But then I worked up in Tacoma, Washington with my father, and then went into the National Guard, basic training. As I ended my National Guard service, I went back to see her just before school started back in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is just outside of Philadelphia. So we traveled into Philadelphia to see Independence Hall, where our nation was founded, and there at Independence Square, at the side of the Liberty Bell, within 10 feet of the Liberty Bell, I lost my freedom. We got married. That was just as school was starting, so that'd be in September that I proposed to her, and we were going to get married at the semester break. That didn't work out for her parents to participate in the wedding celebration, so we moved it up and actually got married on November 24th, 1970 at the Salt Lake Temple. I was taken by Deirdre. I thought she was a very beautiful woman. And the best part is she was very well educated. And I remember Sarah being very worried that I was being hoodwinked by this sophisticated Eastern girl. And she was sophisticated. But it's been a great marriage, and I think what I admire most about her is her ability to communicate with others. I find it the most frustrating at ward socials, and yet she is just she's a great teacher, and all her students love her, and I think that's an indication of where her real strengths are as a person. We got married at just at the Thanksgiving break from school, and the most interesting thing about our first child was trying to convince Deirdre that she was pregnant. She thought there was no way that she could be pregnant, and yet Sean was conceived on our wedding night, as near as we can figure it, and to me it was just an exciting time to know that I'd be a father, and a challenge of the responsibility of it. We had parenthood. I grew up with my grandfather, David Broadbent, grandfather. He lived in our home, and we were actually roommates for a while. Slept in the same bed actually. But he had a picture made up of him in the foreground with a temple behind him, and then a picture of his 12 children all in their cap and gown around. And I think that became for me the ideal of what parenthood is. And so I think as a father, the greatest joy I found is that each of my children have been able to go to college and to graduate from college, and then to have them all married in this Salt Lake Temple. I went into school, when I went into college, I did very well with mathematics, so I just kind of naturally gravitated to engineering and became civil engineering. And then one of the great quandaries was, would I go into the family construction company or follow the engineering field? I went into the construction line and worked with my father and uncle in a family construction company for say about 10 years, and then my father retired, and then my uncle and I went for another about 10 years in that construction company, and then I started working for the LDS Church doing construction administration for temples, principally in South America. And that was 20 years I spent working there for the church. I actually started working construction when I was 11 years old. I was kind of the water boy, made sure all the guys had water and nails, and then would keep all the concrete wet so it wouldn't dry out for 2 or 3 days after it was poured. And Uncle Abel always said I was the only person he ever had to let off work to go to primary. And in fact, after he and I became partners together, I was in the bishopric and I was over the primary, and they had their primary conference, which back then primary was held during the weekday. And he says, I'm still having to let you off to go to primary. Deirdre and I have 5 children. The oldest is Sean. And Sean is, I think part of being a first child is you're kind of very driven and directed, and a heightened sense of right and wrong. The next was Chandra. Chandra was always a little more withdrawn, but really excelled in dancing. And in fact, she danced from the time she was about 5 years old through college. The third is Scott. Scott was always a little more free, I'd say. Scott was a little more of a wanderer. But I remember Deirdre was always the worrier in the family, and she kind of worried about where Scott was going, especially when I was working in California. But I remember coming back, and when we'd have family prayer and I'd ask him to pray, he always gave the most wonderful prayers, and I knew that he was heading down the right path because of the prayers he offered. The next child is Laura, and Laura was just a free spirit. I remember we had a neighbor here that babysat her one day while Deirdre was going somewhere, and when the neighbor brought Laura back, she said, "Does she ever quit singing?" Because she was always just singing and humming and just kind of free. She was always a very sensitive child in that she kind of brought in all the stray dog people, all those that didn't have any other friends. She would kind of bring around, and we were a little bit worried that she might get associated with that, but she was bringing them this way. And then Marissa. She's a great storyteller, and she loves whatever she does. She makes a great story out of it and loves to tell it. And she's the one I think I relate to best on a communicating level. One of my personal strengths, I've learned to be a very, very patient man. Deirdre likes to tease me when I was a bishop, and she asked what was happening. I said, well, I was just doing some marriage counseling. And she said, she would look at me and wonder, you're doing marriage counseling? I think my strength is, one is I think I can work pretty well with most people. Don't have a strong ego anyway. Part of it is I don't lead out so much probably as I should, but and I believe in leading by example, that you try and live what you preach. And I don't have a lot of friends, but I think I'm a true friend. My father, Finn Bergstedt Paulsen. Memories of him. It's interesting, when I was growing up, he was starting a construction company. He was in the bishopric and then stake presidency, and so I don't have a lot of direct memories of interaction with him, except for the one event I do remember is he and I and some of his friends, we went on a float trip down the Yampa River for I think it was 4 or 5 days, and that was a great event in our relationship. He was very, I think my enjoyment of parties, I think he did enjoy parties. He was, he liked to tell jokes, but I think he was loyal. He had 2 good friends. One was Elder McConkie and the other were Elder Faust. And I think they liked him very much because he was loyal, he was respectful of the positions they held, but he was just a loyal friend. But their position, he was a friend because of who they were, not because of the position they held. My mother, Sarah Melissa Broadbent, was a very outgoing person, loved to communicate. She loved to talk with people and be involved with who people are. I have a favorite memory in the church news when she was the matron of the São Paulo temple. She was greeting a little family, I think it was Peru, as I remember, it was a Peruvian Indian family, and they had the short little people, and then they had the little child, and so she got down on her haunches so she could talk to her kind of eye to eye, and that picture was published, and that's I think that's who she was. She was interested in people and she was easy. She was the person. My dad I didn't communicate very well with. Not that we didn't communicate, but Mother and I had a very good ability to communicate. She always thought I didn't speak enough or wasn't open enough, but that was her complaint about Dad too. But I always felt like I was very open with her. A couple of fun stories about Mom and Dad. One is that Dad was a rock hound. He loved to go out and find rocks and then cut them and polish them. And he and Elder McConkey were out one day and kind of going into the side of a bank, and all of a sudden they were working there side by side, and they both rolled the opposite way as the embankment caved down right on where they had been, or where they would have been crushed. They said it was a large cave-in. And Elder McConkey told the story, and it became published in the church's publications. And Mom read it, and she got mad at Dad because she had never heard the story. She had to read it in the church news about what had happened. Another story. What was the other story? Another story is they had a great group of friends from the time they were in college, and they were old mission people that served in Brazil together. And they would get together every month at one of their houses. There were about 10 couples. And I remember going as a small child, and I either they put me on a bed and there was a bunch of us sleeping there, or they put me out in the car and let me sleep out in the back seat of the car. But Mom tells a story of how they had this group in their house, and all of a sudden they asked, where's Finn? And he'd gone and went into the bedroom and gone to sleep and let the party keep going. He thought no reason that he should be the water on the party. But Mom didn't take to that. She was pretty mad at him for leaving the party like that. And then the other one was, this is probably, my sisters need to tell a story. It happened actually while I was on my mission. One of my sisters gave Dad a back scratcher for Christmas, and they wrapped it up. He unwrapped it and says, "Oh, that'll be great. I'll really use that." Then he proceeded to put it in his closet, bedroom closet, and never got it out. So the next Christmas, they wrapped it up again. He got it and unwrapped it and said, "Oh, I've always wanted a back scratcher." He didn't remember that he'd gotten it the year before. Well, I think, I don't know the exact story, but I think he found out that he had already received it, and it basically said the same words. So the next year, they gave it to him a third time. He hadn't used it yet. The third time, and when he was feeling it and realized what it was, and he says, "Oh, I don't even need to unwrap this one. You can just give it to me again the following year." Reflecting on where I think I realized who I was or what I was about. I've been called on a mission to São Paulo, Brazil. I got down and it's kind of I think every missionary goes through a time where they don't really understand the language, or you're adapting to the completely different lifestyle. And I remember being rather discouraged, and I was reading in an old issue of the Ensign magazine, and in that issue they had a picture of each of the members of the Quorum of the 12, and on the back side of it a little bit of their story. And I remember reading about Spencer W. Kimball, and I kind of felt a little bit of a relationship to Elder Kimball because I had met him personally, and he had actually, on a tour of the mission, he had slept in our home. And I had to witness that he was a prophet, as we sustained as one of the 12 apostles. And with that, at that same time, and kind of part of that experience is I was always wondering, did I have a testimony? And I suddenly realized that I had a testimony, I'd always had a testimony, and I think I was actually born with a testimony, but I just didn't realize it. And all of a sudden I realized that I had had that experience my whole life, and I realized that I did have a testimony of the truth of the gospel and the restoration of the gospel. Okay, what do I think I've taught my children? It's interesting, I don't think I've taught them too much by what I've said to them, but I think I've taught them more by the example. But one thing is, I think we each of us bring in our own background and our own life and what we're involved in what we do with our children. And one thing we decided to do, the kids all wanted jobs, and what were they worth? And so I put out and said, okay, who wants to cut the front lawn? And whoever you bid on it, what do you want? How much do you want to do it? And we'll see who's the best, gives us the best price for it. And in the backyard and different projects around. So I had each of the kids bid on it, just like they were bidding on a construction site, construction project. Things that make me happy, I'd say being married, family, being involved in things greater than myself, being involved in the church, family reunions. I love to be together with the family. And I love parties. I love to be where you sit around the table and just talk. I don't like going and playing games and that kind of stuff. What do I hope that people remember about me? And I hope they feel, one is that I was consistent, I lived as the beliefs I taught, that I was a friend, and that I was just an all-around good person.